Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH, solutions for every challenge, equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers. Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Agribusiness. Yes, there's a substitution in the lineup. You might check your scorecard. It's a privilege to be in here filling in for vacationing Mike Pearson this weekend. This weekend ahead of National Agriculture Week, National Agriculture Day that takes place every year. This is an interesting season for farmers. We talk about planting and harvesting. We talk about the spring season, the farm show season. This is lobbying season. In the nation's capital and in state capitals, you'll see many farm groups coming in to talk with their lawmakers. That'll be the case of the week ahead, for example, in Washington for Agriculture Day. I talked about this with the president of the American Farm Bureau, Zippy Duvall. I asked him what he tells a young farmer who might question whether it's important indeed to go in and talk with those who represent us.
Same thing I'd tell them my dad told me when I was a young man. They said, you know, son, you're running a business here, and there's people in your state capital in Washington, D.C. making policy decisions every day that's going to affect your life. And they don't really know what you're going through every day. Your story is valuable, and you should be going to your state capital and to Washington, D.C. to meet with your representatives to make sure that they understand what policies they're considering, how it affects you on your farm, and how it has helped you in the past, and what it might do to you in the future.
Zippy, could it be argued that those relationships are more important than ever these days?
By all means. You know, when you get a congressman that knows you personally and is facing a decision, whether it be Farm Bill or any other issue, that we might pick up the phone and call you and ask you for your opinion, that is a priceless, valuable relationship to have for you and your neighbors in our industry.
As Zippy and other farm leaders point out, it's not just an opportunity that we have, it's a right that we have to lobby those who represent us in state capitals and in the nation's capital. And many of them also point out that if we are not there to be heard, only those that oppose agriculture will have their voices heard. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Today's larger, heavier equipment can lead to more soil compaction issues. Firestone Ag IFVF tires with the AD2 technology maximize load capacity while minimizing soil compaction. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more. Well, we're going to talk a bit about the dairy industry and some of its challenges this weekend with Ben Lane from Terrain. Ben, welcome back. We know you were here a few months ago.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we don't talk about the dairy business often enough, I guess. As a milk consumer, it's near and dear to my heart. But let's talk about the milk price situation right now. We had some good months a couple of years ago. We've seen some erratic performance since then. How would you characterize it?
Sure, yeah. 2022 was a great year in terms of milk prices. 2023, not as good, but still realistically, when you average it out over the course of the year, it turned out to be, I think, the second highest milk price year on record. It had plenty of challenges with feed costs and margins, but overall, it worked out to be decent in terms of historical price levels. Now, there was a couple when I was here last year, there was some really tough months in the summer last year. So I think this year we're looking at a similar average level that we saw last year. I'm hopeful, and I don't expect that we will have to see that same drop that we saw last year. So hopefully we'll be able to stay in a little bit more of a moderate range. I think we'll also see better margins. I think we're seeing the feed costs start to come down. That's going to be beneficial. Still issues with labor costs and interest expenses that are starting to eat into that margin. Those are still lingering, but I think on the feed cost and milk price front, things are looking pretty decent this year.
The feed cost is a significant factor, is it not? Along with labor, which you mentioned, the challenges of labor, you know, those challenges always come up in any conversation you have with folks in the dairy industry or pork production. The folks very reliant upon that workforce. But the costs overall seem to be in check at the present time. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, I think at least feed costs are moving in a favorable direction. Right. It always kind of varies in terms of when that starts to hit the farm finances, depending on which, what silage pile you're eating into at this point. So it takes time to work through. Even if we're seeing some better grain prices on the board, it's not instantaneous at the farm. But I think it's, compared to last year, it's beneficial. And yeah, we still have some of those same lingering costs that are going to be a little stickier to come back down. But overall, I think we're we're in a relatively good place margin-wise when you take a look at the milk and feed.
Better grain prices on the board. I want to come back to that phrase. It's all your perspective. We're talking about the milk producer's perspective.
Yes, that's right.
In terms of the international market, there was a time when it didn't matter much to us. There was nothing in the way significant of exports. That changed significantly, and that has been a factor that has been a problem over the past couple of years, has it not?
Well, it's been a real benefit if we look at a year like 2022, but 2023, when we started to see some of those exports slow down a bit, that starts to limit our ability to keep climbing in milk price. So I think if there's something that's sort of holding us back from really reaching our potential in terms of milk price this year and what we saw last year is that we've had a hard time seeing exports gain some of their footing. So we rely a lot on China and Southeast Asia as a big customer, obviously. Their economic situation is a little challenging and doesn't look like it's about to turn a major corner anytime soon. So it's a little bit of a challenge trying to get those same volumes of dairy products overseas that we really need to see markets thrive. And
does that weigh then on the producer milk price significantly?
I think at this point it's more that it's limiting our potential to the upside. So we're sort of supported by the fact that in terms of milk production, we're a little bit constrained in our supply. So tight supplies is sort of helping us lift prices, but those slower exports are really kind of limiting our ability to keep going with it.
We're not alone in trying to serve that Asian market. Of course, New Zealand competes with us actively there. I trust they too are seeing a slower demand, are they not?
Yeah, they're dealing with it too, and that's obviously they're dependent in the sense that they're a huge net exporter. So they really, in a much bigger way than us, rely on those exports. They're a little bit limited in their growth potential for a handful of reasons in terms of environmental limitations. But our other major competitor, the EU and Europe generally, we also are competing with them a bit more, where they've had more production the last couple of years. They're starting to pick back up from what had been more of a lull for them. So we had a little bit of benefit from them struggling a couple of years ago. Now they're picking back up in the near term, and that's kind of putting us at competition with Europe again.
I want to talk with you about cheese, if you please, when we come back in the next segment here. Ben Lane from Terrain is with us. He'll be right back. Today's larger, heavier equipment can lead to more soil compaction issues. Firestone Ag IFVF tires with AD2 technology maximize the load capacity while minimizing soil compaction. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more. Ben Lane is back with us from Terrain talking about the dairy situation. Cheese has to come up on that discussion, of course. It is so important, and that's very dependent upon the domestic economy, is it not? How we feel about what's going on in the economic situation here.
Sure, yeah. Cheese is very much historically a domestic product, a high-value product, and really a big driver of milk markets in the last several years. As we've seen a decline in fluid milk consumption, we've also seen a lot of that shift towards consumers eating more of their milk in the form of yogurt and butter and things, but especially cheese. So as a result, we've seen more investment in cheese plants, and there's companies looking at producing more cheese to meet some of that demand, and that's really starting to shift some of the dynamics in milk markets that we're seeing.
Is production moving toward those plants? I mean, do we see a shift going on in the country?
Well, it's a little bit of a balance. So when you're looking at building a cheese plant somewhere, these companies are looking at where is there relatively inexpensive milk, where could producers expand to fill those plants? And then producers usually are pretty eagerly looking for where is somebody willing to buy my milk. At this point, though, there's a little bit of a challenge where you've got some big cheese plants going in places like Kansas and Texas, and the timing's not ideal for a lot of producers to expand. So I think they're struggling a little bit to think about how to fill those plants and having to look a little further to pull milk out of other markets to fill those.
In terms of production of milk right now, is the beef situation impacting milk, the cow numbers?
Yeah, very much. We've seen cow numbers declining, and that's what's holding us back from really producing. We had seen pretty steady milk production growth for several years. We've leveled off. A lot of that, I think, ties back to the beef markets and some of the dairy beef cross genetics that we're seeing now, where it's expensive to raise a heifer. It's expensive to buy a replacement right now, especially, and you've also got this potential to, instead of going through that process of raising replacements, you can breed them to beef and get some pretty good revenue, and especially for things like day old. So that's kind of reining in production. It's really changed the the milk cow and the replacement numbers and those dynamics.
Quick question, Farm Bill. Are you watching it for anything that could impact the dairy industry here? I mean, is there anything that, from an economic standpoint, could really make any difference?
I think there's been a lot more attention on dairy in the last couple. I think there's always a little bit of attention on the dairy cliff if you don't hit that deadline. I don't think that's a realistic concern, but I think that dairy has built a couple of insurance programs and things, dairy margin coverage, through the last couple of iterations of farm bills and worked on that. So there might be some minor tweaks, but I don't think there's anything really game-changing that I'm too concerned about for dairy, at least this time around.
And the final few seconds, where do you see milk prices this year?
I think they'll be similar to what they were last year. Again, that's not super exciting, but I do think that there's some hope that we'll see better margins, and I don't think that we're going to see quite the depths that we saw last year. I don't see a need to really hit those bottoms that we saw last summer.
Doggone it, that variability is a challenge for the men and women who milk cows, along with others in agriculture, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Have to manage that margin risk as best they can. Mm-hmm. Ben, thank you. It's good to see you here.
Thank you.
Ben Lane with Terrain, our guest this weekend on This Week in Agribusiness. Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead. Aren't you surprised that I'm back in here this weekend?
No.
That's probably your worst
nice
nightmare.
to see you here, huh? Oh, now come on.
Now, you know that I have to call attention
Yes.
to the anniversary of the Tri-State tornado
Yes.
this week, the 99th anniversary. Next year will be a big observance, Twister Fest, I guess. But that was the deadliest tornado in American history, as you know so well.
Exactly. You've shared stories about that. So amazing the technology that's evolved from those early infancy days to where we're at right now. Yet we still, lose life and property. So in any event, it is that time of the year in the Midwest and the southern states. And yeah, we've got some severe weather lined up here in the weeks to come. But the weather quieting down across the western states. El Nino's been into high overdrive across the west, especially California, sections of the southwest. It's kind of a fast-moving jet stream flow west to east and a pretty quiet setup. Snow totals are a little bit below average off the Cascades and sections of the Bitterroots of the northern Rockies. And boy, it has been this wind one week and the warmth another and the cold for another. Have been all over creation, but a nice recovery expected here. But ongoing dryness and drought is expanding across the northern plains, southern Canadian prairie, a snow drought, if you will. There's a little more optimism. Now, you may not necessarily like the form it comes on down, but with cold air retooling here, no sign of it bodily coming southward, but a strengthening jet stream pattern will ride these weather systems in across the west. They'll energize across the Yellowstone Black Hills area and sweep to the east. And yeah, there's snow and rain in the forecast and some drought relief too for the Black Hills into the Red River Valley of the north and southward through Nebraska as the week wears on. Weather system down through southern California, big upper air low, some cold air up aloft, and you put a little bit of sun on that and even marginal amounts of moisture. Some severe weather into West Texas. Yeah, some additional moisture, but some days it's the high wind and fire situations as well. So we'll take the moisture over the southwestern part of the country. The Sierra Ranges, 25 to 28 inches of water equivalent snowpack. Great runoff prospects, and just the second time since 2015 that we've been able to put back-to-back above average snowfall totals across the Sierra and in through California. Here's this weather system into the far southern plains. A couple of scattered showers here. Wind and warmth back across the heart of the winter wheat belt. Pretty quiet weather picture across the valleys of California, Max, in the mid to late portion of the week.
As is the case with many weather disasters, that fire tragedy in Texas will have a long tail, of course, unfortunately for those affected ranchers there.
Yeah, 1.1 plus million acres were burned, and we're still getting cleanup and recovery, and but still the worst of some of the drought areas out of the central and southern plains. But it is expanding, the dryness and drought, coming off lack of moisture last fall, absence of any snow across parts of the Canadian prairie, the Dakotas, the upper Midwest. Wouldn't be surprised we get planting going here first, and then as the weeks wear on into the rest of the central and southern Corn Belt. Sprinkles and snowflakes. We told you spring wasn't quite here for the Corn Belt. Big change to colder weather in the eastern belt, but just as quickly these roller coaster rides of temperatures come back into play, warm up for the plains across the Corn Belt locales. Nice to see organized rains last week of an inch or two, and more to come later on into the weekend, into the following weekend. Note the much colder air for the last of calving and lambing operations across the northern plains and upper Midwest. A little frost potential east of the Metroplex here early in the week into parts of the Delta region. Boy, that that footprint of dryness and drought virtually gone this wintertime season. Freeze into the Ozarks. Here's that weather system across the desert southwest into the upper Rio Grande Valley. It'll stay there. Wind and warmth and maybe increased fire potential again over parts of the plains mid to late portions of the week, and opportunities for a little more planting across Texas and the Gulf Coast areas late portion of the week too.
Fire threat again. We sure tip our hat to the volunteers who respond to times like that. We need to remember them by all means. How about the eastern part of the country?
And some of those producers that were trucking in hay to help those guys out as well on social media. Some of those pictures. Much colder air. I know we're into March, but it's only March, so there's still a hint of wintertime to go here. Wind and sprinkles and snowflakes into the northeast to New England, so you would get a quick shot of cold off the rains of late last week, and we'll turn it all over on its side again with a milder wind-blown warm-up for the Corn Belt locales. New moisture for the western complex. Good news with dryness and drought here and to the north, despite the drop-off in temperatures and still the feel of wind and cold in wintertime into the northern sections of the northeast and New England. Frost and freeze potential west of the Mississippi as we move on through the early parts of the week. Cold front moving on through Florida, then frost and freeze potential across the mid-Atlantic region and southeastern states as scattered showers and thunderstorms get going onto the southern plains. A 4-week forecast coming up in the second half hour. Max, back over to you.
At the winter farm shows, a lot of folks asked about you. They said, how's that old rascal Greg doing anyway? That when we were in Louisville and at the Houston show.
Muddling along, as the other guy used to say, Finkel used to say.
Yeah, they ask about Orion quite a bit too. We can share with you that Orion is doing well. We visit with him from time to time, and we want to make note of the fact that he has a special event coming up in just a few days. Orion has a birthday celebration the end of March each year. One thing I learned after going to work with Orion some 45 years ago as we became a team at the time, that birthdays are a big deal, and he celebrated them in grand style. You know, growing up on the farm in Indiana, my birthday was never a big deal. We were always in the midst of cultivation of crops or planting of crops at that time on the farm in southwestern Indiana, and there wasn't much happening, but they're a big deal. And Orion will celebrate his 90th, March 31st. If you want to drop him a note, please do so. You can write to us at the address here, 1886 East Fabian Parkway, Batavia, Illinois, or to his email address, bigosam@aol.com. Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Pentair Hypro, a global leader in innovative spray technology for farmers for over 75 years. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Among the costs that farmers are dealing with now is the cost of money. Indeed, the interest rates are something that have drawn a lot of attention from producers. John Mammon, who is with Nutrien Financial, points out that they work with the producers out there in the field to try to manage that particular risk. He visited with Mike Pearson.
We are hearing a lot about interest rates in the marketplace, and one of the biggest things that we hear is the uncertainty in the marketplace. We hear that markets could be softening into 2024, but we haven't seen that yet. And so we plan both for the uncertainty in the existing crop year as well as what could be out there in the future with our growers through field-driven agronomics and field-driven economics within Nutrien Ag Solutions. We take great care in making sure that each year we review an annual cropping plan and an annual economic plan for the crop. And so with that, we've taken the care to be able to fix our interest rates for this year, making sure that the growers have access to the transparency of what their rate is going to be for this crop year. So financing is a benefit. It's not just one other impediment or worry that they have to field for this upcoming crop year.
Looking at the 2024 crop season, that is quite a benefit. John, what else does Nutrien Financial bring to the table that maybe you wouldn't find at other places?
It really starts with that relationship with our customer, their turn row, their farm gate, and their operations, and making sure that that field-driven presence that we bring through our retail organization is mirrored through the presence that we bring with our territory managers at that farm gate level. So that same conversation around agronomic integrity can transfer to the best means for cash flow, terms, rates, and incentives, because at the end of the day, we're complementary to that operating line and how that operating line works. The operating line is that grower's primary source of repayment. We complement that by having unsecured credit in the marketplace that can be used for the products and services, the inputs that our customers buy. That's just another cash flow source, so that operating line can be used even in a difficult market to grow cash flow of the organization and have the liquidity to be able to pivot at a moment's notice if there's uncertainty in the marketplace that arises in any operation.
John, when you're thinking about Nutrien Financial and the customers that you work with, is there a size that you like, or are these tools open to all?
It's open to everybody, and that's the best part, is that when you're a customer of Nutrien Ag Solutions and you qualify a Nutrien Financial account, you have the ability to use all the access to the programs and services. There might be minimum purchase amounts usually that are small hurdles in the process, but it's open to all the customers that we have from our retail organization that are our farmer customers out in the field.
NutrienFinancial.com, the website to keep in mind for those folks. Well, not too many days ago, our friend Mike Pearson visited with some southern Indiana growers that we know. In fact, a lot of people know them from that Live to Farm series on TV. He was talking with them about a disaster they'd had recently.
Well, back at the Farm Progress Show in 2023, I had the chance to catch up with Brooks Cardinal and Kevin Kolb from Live to Farm. We talked about season 2, and you guys were putting in a new grain handling setup, storage setup on your farm. Brooks, is it done?
Yes, it is complete. We got to use it this past fall, and yeah, excited about it.
Brandon Cardinal, of course, run the combine during the harvest season. Did you notice the efficiencies? Did you notice trucks moving more smoothly as you were running through harvest in 2023?
Oh yeah. I just always like to keep moving, and you know, the more you can keep it, the more hours you go, the quicker you can get done. So it was nice. We could definitely run longer and you know, fill it up. And even though our dryer could be a little faster, we could at least keep going for a while and then maybe switch over to beans and do stuff like that and be able to dry for a few days.
Yeah, keep things rolling. Brooks, and Brandon mentioned the dryer, and as you were putting this whole grain upgrade situation into being, that dryer was a part of it. Can you give us some insight into what you were thinking and sort of what shaped your decision to put in the new equipment?
We knew we needed something, so you know, we looked at every angle of our facility on what we currently had, and you know, a bigger dryer would have been nice, but with the cost and with our acres, it just wasn't feasible at this time. So just more wet storage, you know, is what we started with, and that's what was great with AGI is we actually even added, you know, we used to use our leg to fill our dryer, so we kind of went around that and put a AGI grain pump in to load our dryer so our leg could do other jobs. So just working with them and figuring out how to cut a few corners and you know, make stuff a little simpler was a big deal and saved us a lot of money.
Kevin, last year, heading into the harvest season, you and your family had a bit of a shock on the farm. Can you fill us in on what happened last August?
Yeah, so we were actually getting ready for our farmer field day. The night before, on Sunday night, we were getting everything ready, and they were calling for bad storms overnight. And about 1:30 in the morning, the alarm started going off, and we got up, went outside, and holy smoke, it was so windy. And alarms went off up at our turkey barns, and driving up to the road or up to the farm area, we seen some corn blowed over, and we crossed a little county road to get to our buildings there, and that's where we seen trees over, and we could see part of our turkey barns blew down, and we lost a grain bin, and so it was an eventful day.
You ended up making it to harvest, Kevin. It was a challenging growing season for a lot of parts of this country this past year. You not accepted with a tornado. How did the yields end up when the combine finally shut down?
So we probably would have had a record corn crop, you know, except for the wind damage. We actually had our highest yield we ever had, 425 bushel corn. The soybeans were good. They were a little bit down we thought the soybeans was going to be by far our best crop ever. And I think the winds from the tornado lodged them a little bit and knocked a little bit of yield off. But overall, we had a pretty good farm average, corn and beans.
A reminder there that even some high-profile growers can have adverse weather events. Here's to a better season ahead for those folks in southwestern Indiana. There's more coming up on This Week in Agribusiness. Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH, solutions for every challenge, equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Well, there's always next year. The sports fans will say, and some farmers will say that too. Well, next year is here. And as growers look back at the growing season they had last year, some were actually a little bit surprised that it wasn't as bad as they thought it might be. Scott Kay with BASF talked with me about that.
Yeah, I think the crop, like farmers, pretty resilient in these times, and we'll have to be resilient this coming year. But you're right, the crop really hung in there, waited for a few more rains. Like on our farm in Iowa, that was the same sentiments. Is that I'm glad I followed through with my whole program, which was a herbicide down, followed by a post, followed by the fungicide, so Veltima post on the crop, and it seemed to hold in, and the yield was there.
Some were thinking, where would we have been without the research that was done to develop these products, to bring them forward? Is that going to be there in the future? We know that's a long tunnel to bring new products to market.
Yeah, absolutely. For those watching today, every dollar the BASF earns from farmers, we're turning that back in, 11 cents of every dollar, into research and development and agriculture. And so we're heavily invested. What's going to come from that is, if you're trying to keep track of where those dollars would go, that would equate to us launching some 25 new products over the next 5 years. And so quite an investment, and we're trying to solve problems that are happening right now today, but also thinking out a little bit further.
And it takes a while. I mean, you really have to be dedicated over the long haul, don't you?
You absolutely do, and I think that's why I've been so fortunate to work for a company like BASF. Their continued investment, both into chemistry, but people. We know that farmers have the biggest job on earth, and it's really important that we meet them in the field to really understand today's problems. I think about a few like SCN, so nematodes, those should be tested today. I think resistant weeds like water hemp. And then last, corn rootworm, big problem this past year, and I think that's something that has to be taken care of both by buying the right trait, but then using a soil insecticide like Nerisma.
You mentioned the people. When we've been out over the countryside visiting with your folks out in the field, the Plant Smart, Grow Smart series that we've done, it strikes me always, the relationship, the partnership that your people have with the growers.
Yeah, we really have to learn from each other, because we won't see everything, and so we get a lot of our best insight from farmers and what they're experiencing. And so we even try and think of new ways we could help. We launched initiatives around data, that Xarvio Field Manager and Xarvio Seed Select, with the idea that there's partnership even beyond our people, with the ag retailer and the grower choosing the right varieties. And so we think placement and selection are two of the biggest decisions farmers make when they purchase that seed.
The decision making, that's the big thing that I think many growers find daunting, and you're helping them with that, sorting through your toolbox, but also bringing all the other elements together through the data.
We really believe that soybeans and soybean yield are what's next for the farmer to really take advantage of. I know that if you and I asked a farmer about how he picks his hybrids for corn, we would get a long dissertation about over time, how they've done that, how they compare even today. We want that to be the same way they think about soybeans. So our aspiration at BASF is 100 bushel average. Today we're about in the mid-50s. And so, but there's certainly a path there of management, but one of it starts with picking that right variety.
Our friend Scott Kay, who, as he pointed out, hails from a farm in Iowa. We enjoyed visiting with him in the BASF booth and signing some copies of our book there at Commodity Classic. Greg Solier is back now with his extended farm weather forecast for the nation. Well, a lot of moisture on his map could mean some relief for some of you and, a nervous time for others. Let's see what Greg is looking at in the week ahead. There are some good amounts, right?
Exactly, yeah, and we really need some of that moisture where we've experienced the ongoing expansion of dryness, drought, lack of snow cover and snowpack, by and large through the upper Midwest and parts of the northern plains, and we will get it. Again, may not like it, but it's moisture, and I think a lot of these locales here through the upper Midwest have set records, either the top 5 or top 10 or even least snow on record for the 3-month meteorological wintertime season from December into February here. So moisture is here. It's welcome. Not great for calving operations and livestock, but we'll take it. Note the complexity of weather coming off another inch or two into parts of the central Corn Belt. We'll get it again here, and including the worst drought areas into this part of the Corn Belt, parts of southern Illinois, and from Wisconsin on north and westward. Even the moisture pattern in the southwestern states is favorable. Pacific Pacific Northwest and across the Delta and Southeast. This will be primarily a late weekend, upcoming weekend scenario, and we'll welcome in springtime astronomically on the 19th.
And it's National Agriculture Week. How warm for the week of March 25th, then?
Well, a pretty good contrast to temperatures, as you would expect this time of the year. Still looking at a lobe of Arctic air up here, jet stream in across the Pacific West, buckling across the plains. The last of this warmth that has played out much of the wintertime season into the eastern states. And you know, we get that compaction of temperatures, the isotherms. You get this scenario. Don't panic, don't worry. I know we're getting close to April, but the moisture is a benefit into the western states, across the plains, across the Corn Belt, into the upper Midwest, and the usual suspect areas of severe weather from the Ohio back into sections of the southern plains.
The week of April 1st.
Nothing too spooky or scary or foolish. Use your smarts and use your noggin. It is a progressive weather pattern. The systems are moving. We're not getting locked down. Remember, the trough was here. Now it's here. The warmth is still over the southeastern part of the country. The lobe of cold is retreating. Nice ridge across the western states as we move on through the first week of the month of April. Yeah, there's still some wet weather, but I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe some planting tries to get going over the western Corn Belt, more so in the upper Midwest in the absence of significant moisture over the past few months. Severe weather of the deep south and southeastern part of the country, but roughly from the Mississippi River into the western lakes and westward max, a firm go of it.
The week of April 8th, that's going to be interesting. The eclipse belt coming up, Missouri, southern Illinois, southern Indiana, northwest Ohio. Some farmers may have trouble moving equipment. Those roads are going to be jammed, they say.
Exactly, and we think in absence of weather systems as well, the ridge over the western part of the country, note the trough of this section of the country, and a pretty quiet weather pattern except for the southern plains, ought to be looking at a fair amount of quiet skies across much of the Midwest.
Now, Farm Progress Roundup, brought to you by Brandt Industries. Lead the field with Brandt's lineup of highly effective and efficient high-speed discs and land rollers. Visit Brandt.ca for more. Matt Youngman, National Events Manager for Farm Progress. Good to see you once more.
Great to see you again, Max. Good to see you all the way through that winter farm show swing.
Yeah, there was a lot going on there for a while. Now the gaze, I guess, has shifted toward the growing season ahead, and for you, that means the big shows that take place late in the summer.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when National Farm Machinery Show and Commodity Classic end, everybody's mind kind of flips to Farm Progress Show. So about the 5th of March or so, our phone starts ringing off the hook with everybody's big ideas and plans and everything that they want to get done at this year's Farm Progress Show and Husker Harvest Days as well.
There's a lot of planning that goes into those exhibits. But one thing that occurred to me is the planting that'll be taking place there. Do you set a particular date by which you want to have the crop planted there at the show site at Boone?
Well, so yeah, this year we have April 10th circled on the calendar, and the last time we were in Boone, we didn't get that corn in the ground till May 19th, and that's what created the challenge for the whole growing season in 2022. 2023, everything went perfect. We got the corn in the ground right on time, and we had great demonstrations there at Decatur last year. And so I know that everything is in place. The seed is there. John Deere partners with us to get all that crop planted really quickly when we're in Boone. And so I was talking to David Moline from John Deere at Commodity Classic, and he's got everything ready to go. The planter, he's got 2 planters set aside and ready to go. The seed is there. The host farmers have the ground in great condition. And, if it weren't for the calendar, there's a couple times here where it might have gotten planted already, but we're just going to hold off. And we feel real comfortable with that April 10th date. And so we have another meeting coming up at the show site in mid-April. So hopefully we've got corn in the ground by the time we're in town on the 17th and 18th of April.
Clearly, you're subject to the same challenges that farmers are in getting planted. How many pieces of this show will be in flux from one year to the next? In other words, can you just go in there with a template from what you did before?
Well, that's kind of the beauty of being at these permanent sites now, is that you can look back on what you've done. Now we're in Boone this year. The first show there was in 2008. And so you always kind of go into the planning for the next show with last year's notes in hand. Coming up here next week, actually, we have a traffic meeting. And so you sit down and you say, okay, what worked well in 2022 and before that, and you use that as the foundation. I would say, as we look at traffic for the Boone show and, kind of using that as an example, there's always some big changes, kind of with the question that you asked. This year, we have a whole new traffic route from the north. The Department of Transportation has put in an overpass over the train line that runs on the north side of the show site. And so we're going to have an entirely new traffic route for the folks coming in from the north. They're not going to have to get on Highway 30 at all, which is really exciting to add that in.
Finally, give us the dates quickly for the Farm Progress Show and then for Husker.
Exactly. Farm Progress Show is August 27th, 28th, 29th, and Husker Harvest Days is September 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Well, mark them on the calendar. We'll be checking with you, I'm sure, as the season goes on. Good to see you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Max.
Matt Youngman, National Events Manager at Farm Progress. There's more coming up on This Week in Agribusiness. Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, where we spotlight another great American farm tractor. There is that debate that'll be going on when it looks so bad. When it looks as bad as this mess, do you dare tackle it? Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by the folks at Mystic Lubricants. Mystic Lubricants are made to make it last. Oh my, there are some that are really a desperate case. Brad Frerichs knew this tractor very well. I'm not even sure you can tell what it is. But there at Litchfield, Illinois, he knew the history of the tractor from back in the 60s. He knew that it sat outside for a while. He knew it was in the shed for a while. And then Brad decided, all right, let's tackle this thing. And you take a look at the results of that 1957 Farmall 230. Oh, what a magnificent restoration there at Litchfield, Illinois. Well, our friend Mark Stock is watching all kinds of equipment across the block each week at Big Iron Auctions. We're always pleased to have his report. Here's what's ahead for him.
Well, hello, Max. March has historically been one of the busiest months of the year for machinery auctions, and the week of March the 18th is a big one here for Big Iron and Sullivan Auctioneers. We start on Monday and Tuesday with a 2-day no-reserve dealer and farmer equipment auction. Just an outstanding lineup of late model farm machinery selling. Also on the 19th is the Davidson Capital LLC auction in Indiana, featuring some construction and farm equipment. On March the 20th, a very large sale, folks, with equipment from all across the country. Van Wall Equipment, one of the featured sellers, selling a John Deere 2230 60-foot field cultivator. The Bradley Cook Estate Sale features 28 items by Liberty, Illinois. Freezy Harvesting LLC out of McPherson, Kansas, will sell Kenworth T800 and Peterbilt 379 semi-truck tractors. Prairie State Tractor, with various locations across Illinois, will also participate in this sale. Berkey's Farm Store, also various locations across Illinois. Woco Transportation LLC from Truesdale, Missouri. Kunow Implement in Iowa. And Bill R. Dury is retiring, and their sale March the 20th. Max, all of this equipment sells next week on Big Iron.
Our FFA Tribute brought to you by Pioneer, developing new generations of seed innovations for new generations of farmers. Pioneer, what's next happens here. Happening here this weekend, we visit with the Western Region Vice President of the National FFA, Emily Gossett from New Mexico. Emily, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Real fine. Silver City, New Mexico. I looked at it on the map, and you're way down in the southern part of the state, aren't you?
Yes, sir. Southwest corner.
How exciting has it been being a national officer? And I gather you're traveling the entire country, not just the West.
Yes, sir. I'm currently in South Carolina in a hotel room, but to put it into words, this experience is, the only word I can come up with is surreal. It's one of those things that you always think about when you're a member, but you never actually fully believe can happen to you. But it's been surreal.
You know, one thing that occurs to me every year is FFA officers come back from their convention and they say it's a life-changing experience. I would imagine you would join that chorus, wouldn't you?
Yes, it's so life-changing. You take a year off of school and you spend the year just traveling the country and meeting students from all walks of life. And it gives you such a broad perspective on what agriculture looks like in so many different states, but what agriculture means to so many different students.
To young people, especially those who are maybe just entering FFA or have not yet, what do you tell them that they will gain from it?
I always say that the FFA organization has seen everybody else, but it hasn't seen you. So to show up fully and authentically yourself is the best thing that you can do for this organization, because your perspective and your life experiences and your goals and your values are different than everybody else. And so we need to see that perspective in our organization. So that's my piece of advice that I give to everybody, because I think it was something that I really needed to hear when I was younger.
Emily Gossett, thank you. And here's to a great conclusion of your term later on this year. You have a lot of miles to travel yet. Emily Gossett, Western Region Vice President of the FFA from New Mexico. Travel with care. Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by Copperhead Ag Products. Visit copperheadag.com for more information. Oh, it's not just the equipment that dazzles. As Chad points out, the software can be mighty fine too. Watch closely what it can do.
I promised you I'd show you the software that we use to operate these drones and even process the data. As you can see here, this is the system I'm flying. It's got a full frame 35mm sensor on board, and I'm going to take a scan of that grain dryer setup. Now I've got all this synced together. In the upper left-hand corner, that you can see the drone flying. In the lower left-hand, that is what the image is capturing. And in the right-hand lower corner, that is the first-person view. So that's like the pilot view looking at the drone. The controller does all this stuff really automatically once you program it. And then what I really want you to pay attention to is down in the lower right-hand corner. That's the image of data capture. Here they are all laid out, and then that background image, that is it in 2D. So that's all those kind of stitched together like doing a puzzle at grandma's table. But what I like is the 3D imagery that you're able to create. Now we're using RTK correction, and all those little green dots you see, those are pictures. And you can see after I flew over the top, then I also flew up and down the dryer, the grain leg, just trying to capture as much data as I could. Then I threw it into the software. This happens to be, the software is called DJI Terra. And after it took several hours to process, this is the imagery you get. It is so accurate. It's unbelievable. You'll see here, I'm going to measure this downspout. It's a couple button clicks. You can also bring this imagery in to AutoCAD and do things with it. It is phenomenal. Definitely one of my favorite softwares out in the field is Drone Deploy. You can see some crop damage here from side dressing we took last year. Lots of guys will be using stand count with it very soon, and we'll report back once we get crops in the field.
All right, Chad, we appreciate it. Coming up next, we visit with a name some of you will know, Mr. Steiner, Dan Steiner of Steiner Tractor Parts. Stay with us. He grew up in the tractor parts business, and Dan Steiner continues to grow that company, serving folks all over the world with the parts that they sell and some of which they manufacture. Dan Steiner stopped in the studio with me this week and shared with me some of the stories from their earlier days at Steiner Tractor Parts.
The original catalog was all Steiner brand parts. My father was doing salvage, and there were a lot of parts that he couldn't meet the demand for. So he got the bright idea to start building his own parts back in the 70s. And he had a friend who was a pattern maker who worked for General Motors, and in the 70s things were kind of tight. So his friend agreed to build him some patterns, and Dad took them down to the foundry and got the manifolds poured, and then took them back to his friend and had them machined. And we started with that, and that was a success. And with the profits, we poured that in. Well, we had to pay off the loan, but with the extra profit, we paid that and poured that in more tooling. And over time, the more parts we had, the more parts we were able to build. It wasn't until 1999 that we actually started cataloging other people's parts.
And in the future, Dan assured me they plan to add some more parts.
We usually have about 1,000 parts on the dream list. We are
on the dream list?
Yeah, we are constantly bringing out new products. As I mentioned, in '99 we started adding parts that we distributed, which we stocked for our customers, so we just didn't catalog them. And we started making parts because some of them were obsolete. Well, since '99, a lot more products have become obsolete, especially since 2020.
Sure.
So we've had problems getting things as simple as oil filters the last 4 years, and our oil filters, almost all of them are made in the U.S., So it's not a matter of supply chain disruptions worldwide, although perhaps they have issues with material. Right now, we're looking at building a whole line of our own gaskets in the United States because some of the aftermarket gasket companies who also supplied the OEs are obsoleting the gaskets for the antique and classic tractors.
So you have to stay nimble to make sure you can still meet that demand.
It's a big challenge because we're in the specialty parts business. And there are some items like oil filters that are commodities, but they, like I said, they've even given us challenges. And because we're in the specialty parts business, a lot of the product that we make, it'll take a while to sell a production run. We have to make a fairly large quantity to dollar average the tooling into the products.
Sure.
And to make it economical to set up the tooling and run it. And so specialty parts is a challenging business. Sometimes it takes us so long to sell products that when we're done, the tooling might be obsolete. When we started making manifolds, it was all wooden tooling. By the late 90s, they went to some type of plastic, and today it's all steel. So for our first manifold, we've been through at least 3 iterations of tooling and sometimes more.
In his visit here, I learned Dan Steiner loves the tractor parts business, but more importantly, the people who have the old tractors, the clubs to which they belong. SteinerTractorParts.com for more information. Well, it's National Agriculture Week ahead of us, National Agriculture Day on Tuesday. We hope you observe it in your own way in our tribute to America's agriculture industry. On behalf of Mike Pearson this weekend, this is Max Armstrong. Have a great week. This Week in Agribusiness has been brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by 22 Creative Group and has been a presentation of Farm Progress Broadcast. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.